To the human eye scanning the shimmering, heat-distorted horizon of the deep Australian outback, the phenomenon appears at first like a terrifying, localized weather anomaly. A massive, undulating green and yellow cloud suddenly materializes out of the scorching blue sky, moving with the violent velocity of a hurricane and roaring with a collective deafening static of a million frantic voices. This is not a storm of dust or wind, but a synchronized superswarm of millions of wild budgerigars, Melopsittacus undulatus, packing the air so densely that they physically block out the blinding sun and cast a dark, shifting shadow across the barren red desert below. Driven by an unyielding, hardwired survival code, this massive avian collective moves as a single, multi-headed superorganism, executing razor-sharp tactical maneuvers at 50 miles per hour to evade the striking talons of hunting falcons that track the edges of the swarm. When people look at solitary yellow or blue budgie sitting inside a quiet wire cage in a modern living room, they completely fail to realize they are looking at a highly engineered biological nomad that is hardwired for brutal, large-scale survival. The domestic pet industry has spent centuries shrinking the identity of this creature into a fragile, decorative novelty, yet beneath those bright feathers lies a genetic blueprint of an absolute evolutionary powerhouse. These birds are not delicate ornaments. They are highly specialized, nomadic endurance flyers possessing a neurological matrix that allows them to map resource scarcity across an entire continent, process visual data at blinding speeds, and execute hyper-complex social strategies within flocks that outnumber the human populations of major cities. This is the untold chronicle of the budgerigar, the wild emerald swarm that mastered the deadly, arid frontos of the Australian continent, outnavigated catastrophic droughts, and developed a level of cognitive intelligence that challenges everything we thought we knew about avian evolution. The evolutionary history of the wild budgerigar is intrinsically tied to the harsh, unpredictable climate of the Australian interior, a vast landscape of extreme weather where surface water can vanish overnight and temperatures regularly soar past 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. To survive in this unforgiving furnace, the wild ancestral budgie had to abandon the stationary, territorial lifestyles of other parrot species and transform into a perpetual nomad. For millions of years, the forces of natural selection hammered away at the bird's anatomy, stripping away any unnecessary physical mass and optimizing its entire biological framework for efficient, long-distance desert traversal. Unlike their larger, heavier parent cousins that rely on dense rainforest canopies and stable fruit trees, budgies adapted to become grass seed specialists, a dietary restriction that forced them to chase the highly erratic, seasonal rainfall patterns of the outback. Because rain in the Australian interior falls randomly and inconsistently, a stationary flock of budgies would face immediate extinction as soon as the local watering holes dried up and the native Spinifex grass died out. To counter this environmental death sentence, the budgie developed a highly advanced nomadic behavior model, turning the entire species into a restless, airborne scouting network that uses atmospheric cues, changes in humidity, and low-frequency weather sounds to locate distant storm fronts from hundreds of kilometers away. To appreciate the sheer physical endurance of the budgerigar, one must analyze the specialized anatomical engineering that allows a bird weighing less than 35 grams to fly over 100 kilometers in a single day under a burning desert sun. The skeletal structure of a budgie is an incredibly lightweight framework composed of hollow, air-filled pneumatic bones that are internally reinforced with microscopic struts to absorb the immense kinetic stress of high-frequency flapping flight. This ultralight design is paired with incredibly powerful, dark-flesh pectoral muscles that are rich in myoglobin and mitochondria, allowing for sustained aerobic respiration without the buildup of crippling lactic acid. Their wing anatomy is uniquely long and pointed compared to other small birds, creating a highly efficient aspect ratio that maximizes lift while minimizing aerodynamic drag. When a budgie transitions into high-speed cruising flight, it can maintain a steady speed of 40 to 50 miles per hour, utilizing a distinct undulating flight pattern where it alternates between rapid, high-power wing beats and brief, aerodynamic glides to conserve metabolic energy. This physical engine is supported by a hyper-efficient respiratory system that uses a series of specialized internal air sacs to ensure a continuous, one-way flow of fresh oxygen to the lungs, allowing the bird to pant rapidly and dissipate lethal core body heat without ever hyperventilating or collapsing from dehydration. The navigation and survival of a budgie moving within a high-velocity swarm depend entirely on a visual processing system that operates far beyond the sensory limits of the human eye. Budgies possess a visual frame rate that is estimated to be over 5 times faster than a human's, meaning they see the world in what is effectively a continuous hyper-slow motion stream. This allows an individual bird flying packed shoulder to shoulder within a swirling, chaotic mass of a million other individuals to instantly perceive the millimeter-scale movement of its neighbor and adjust its own flight trajectory within a fraction of a millisecond, completely preventing mid-air collisions that would result in fatal wing damage. Furthermore, the eyes of a budgie are equipped with a 4-channel color vision system that includes specialized receptors for ultraviolet UV light, a spectrum that is completely invisible to human beings. This UV vision transforms a dull, monotone desert landscape into a vibrant, high-contrast resource map. Wild grass seeds coated in protective waxes glow intensely under UV light, allowing a scouting budgie flying high above the ground to instantly spot hidden feeding fields amid the parched desert scrub. This ultraviolet perception also plays a critical role in their complex mating and social choices, as the bright yellow feathers on a wild budgie's crown and cheeks reflect brilliant UV patterns that signal their health, genetic strength, and vitality to potential partners within the chaotic swarm. The true survival secret of the budgerigar, however, does not lie within its physical speed or its sharp vision, but in its profound, highly complex social intelligence. A single budgie stranded alone in the vast Australian desert is a defenseless target for predators and an easy victim of starvation. Therefore, the species evolved to operate exclusively as a highly cooperative collective mind. Within the massive nomadic superswarms, there are no permanent leaders or rigid hierarchies. Instead, the flock utilizes a system of decentralized, democratic decision-making to govern its movements. When the swarm descends onto a rare, exposed watering hole, a tactical situation where the birds are incredibly vulnerable to ambushes by predatory hawks and dingoes, they do not rush down individualistically. Instead, the flock congregates in surrounding eucalyptus trees, engaging in a deafening, synchronized chorus of vocal chatter that acts as a democratic voting process. As the intensity of the calling escalates, it reaches a specific behavioral threshold that signals collective agreement, prompting the entire mass to drop down to the water simultaneously in a brief, overwhelming blur that completely confuses and saturates the targeting capabilities of local predators. This brilliant combination of hyper-enduring mechanics, high-speed vision, and collective psychological intelligence turned the wild budgerigar into the defining avian master of the untamed Australian interior. Yet, this evolutionary mastery of the wild desert frontiers was merely the first phase of the budgie's historical trajectory. As European explorers began mapping the Australian continent in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, they encountered these vibrant, swirling clouds of green and gold, instantly recognizing them as a completely unique, highly captivating marvel of the natural world. Little did these early naturalists know that collecting a few small specimens from the wild outback would trigger a massive global chain reaction that would soon pull this highly specialized desert nomad out of its ancient wilderness and drop it into the heart of human civilization. As shipping lanes opened up across the globe, the budgerigar was poised to undergo a rapid, dramatic transformation, transitioning from a wild collective survivor into a global domestic phenomenon. The highly adaptable genetic code that allowed the bird to survive the brutal extremes of the Australian desert was about to face a completely different kind of evolutionary pressure inside the laboratories, aviaries, and living spaces of human societies worldwide. To understand how this wild desert nomad successfully hacked the domestic human psychology and established itself as a permanent fixture of global culture, we must trace the historic voyage of the first captive breeding pairs and the explosive rise of the international budgie trade. The global transformation of the budgerigar from a wild, resilient desert nomad into an elite status symbol of Western civilization began in the year 1840, when the renowned English ornithologist and artist John Gould secured the very first live specimens from the Australian interior and transported them aboard a wooden sailing ship bound for England. The voyage across the volatile, unpredictable oceans was a brutal trial that mirrored the harsh conditions of the outback, yet the small bird survived the arduous journey, instantly captivating the attention of British high society upon their arrival in London. Within months, the striking appearance, energetic personality, and intense social nature of the shell parrot, as it was then known, triggered a massive wave of aristocratic fascination that quickly escalated into a full-blown commercial mania across the European continent. During the Victorian era, ownership of an exotic Australian budgerigar became the ultimate statement of colonial wealth and fashionable sophistication, leading to a highly lucrative, cutthroat international trade network. Wealthy aristocrats competed fiercely to acquire the most vibrant green and yellow specimens, constructing elaborate, ornate indoor aviaries lined with mahogany and brass to showcase these miniature foreign wonders in their parlors. Demand grew so intensely that large commercial shipping fleets began targeting the Australian coastlines, deploying teams of trappers who captured tens of thousands of wild budgies from the edges of the desert swarms, packing them into poly-ventilated wooden crates for mass export across the globe. The losses during these early oceanic transport routes were staggering, with up to 80% of the wild-caught bird perishing from stress and disease before ever reaching a foreign port, a devastating toll that forced European entrepreneurs to shift their strategies from importation to intensive domestic breeding programs. The establishment of early domestic breeding facilities in England, Germany, and France marked the true beginning of the budgie's genetic divergence from its wild ancestors. Wealthy hobbyists and commercial breeders quickly realized that the budgie possessed a remarkably short reproductive cycle and a highly plastic genetic structure that could be easily manipulated through selective breeding. In the wild, the green and yellow plumage of the budgie was a strictly enforced survival mandate, a natural camouflage that allowed the bird to blend seamlessly into the spinifex grass and eucalyptus leaves to avoid detection by hawks. However, in the safe, predator-free environment of captive aviaries, random genetic mutations began to appear. In 1878, a Belgian breeder successfully isolated the very first blue mutation, a stunning aesthetic breakthrough that completely stripped the yellow pigment from a bird's feathers and lit a fire under the global breeding community. The discovery of the blue mutation shattered the genetic monotony of the species and opened the floodgates for an era of intense, competitive color classification. Breeders began working like medieval alchemists, systematically pairing specific genetic lines to engineer birds with completely artificial color variations that had never existed in the natural world. Within a few decades, the ancient green nomad was systematically re-engineered into an array of cobalt blues, pure albinos, rich lutinos, and complex split-pattern mutations known as pied and cinnamon. This intense aesthetic manipulation completely decoupled the budgie from its wild survival origins, turning a hardened desert warrior into an industrialized living canvas designed solely to satisfy the visual preferences and economic markets of human collectors. The evolution of the domestic budgerigar took a radical, anatomically extreme turn in the mid-20th century with the emergence of the specialized exhibition budgerigar, commonly referred to as the English budgie. Unlike the standard pet budgie, which maintained a physical frame relatively close to its wild Australian ancestors, the English budgie was systematically engineered by competitive show breeders to become an entirely different physical entity. Through decades of relentless inbreeding and selective artificial selection, breeders maximized specific structural traits to meet the rigid, stylized standards of international show judges, effectively creating a massive, heavily feathered doppelganger that bore little resemblance to the sleek, high-speed nomad of the outback. The anatomical modifications of the English budgie came at a massive, tragic cost to the bird's natural biological functionality and physical well-being. These engineered giants were bred to be twice the size and weight of a wild budgie, featuring massively oversized heads and a hyper-extended plume of feathers that cascaded over their faces like a heavy shroud. This thick, unnatural feathering completely obscured their eyes, severely restricting their peripheral vision and leaving them perpetually disoriented. The elegant, highly efficient primary flight feathers that once allowed their ancestors to cruise effortlessly across vast continental desert expanses were shortened and weakened, reducing these proud, agile aviators to clumsy, heavy-bodied ground dwellers that could barely manage to fly from one low perch to another without panting from physical exhaustion. Beneath the superficial prestige of the exhibition show benches, the internal biology of these highly modified birds began to collapse under the weight of genetic corruption. The intensive inbreeding required to lock in these extreme physical traits introduced a cascade of hereditary health defects, including a devastating vulnerability to chronic tumors, severe thyroid dysfunction, and hyper-enlarged hearts that struggled to pump blood through their oversized bodies. While a wild Australian budgie possesses a highly resilient immune system and can easily live for over 15 years in optimal conditions, the average lifespan of an English exhibition budgie plummeted to a mere 4 to 6 years, their fragile bodies turning into cellular ticking time bombs engineered solely for short-term aesthetic vanity. This stark biological divide between the wild survivor and the domestic creation exposed the profound impact of human intervention on animal evolution. Man had taken one of the most rugged, aerodynamically perfect endurance flyers on the face of the planet and compressed it into a sedentary, short-lived living statue. Yet, while the physical body of the domestic budgie was being systematically altered and compromised by human breeding, its internal psychological machinery remained remarkably intact. Hidden deep within the brain of every domestic budgie, whether a vibrant blue pet or a heavily feathered exhibition giant, was an ancient, highly sophisticated cognitive matrix waiting to be unlocked by human interaction, a mental capacity that would soon reveal the bird to be a profound linguistic and intellectual marvel. The most shocking and neurologically profound discovery regarding the budgerigar occurred when researchers and pet owners began realizing that this tiny, inexpensive bird possessed a linguistic capability that far surpassed almost every other animal on Earth, including much larger and more expensive parrot species. In 1995, a standard domestic pet budgie named Puck shattered the boundaries of animal communication by entering the Guinness World Records after successfully memorizing and articulating over 1,728 distinct English words. Puck did not merely mimic sounds like a simple mechanical tape recorder. He demonstrated an uncanny ability to combine his massive vocabulary into completely original, context-aware sentences, proving that his tiny brain was actively processing the semantic meaning of human language. The neurobiological architecture that allows a budgie to execute these impossible feats of vocal mimicry and linguistic processing is a marvel of evolutionary specialization. While the human brain utilizes a highly complex neocortex to handle language, the budgie utilizes a specialized, deeply embedded neurological structure known as a song system, which consists of a series of interconnected vocal nuclei located within their forebrain. Recent breakthroughs in avian neuroanatomy reveal that unlike most songbirds, which possess a single core within these vocal centers, the budgie's brain features a unique shell structure, an outer ring of highly active neurons that surrounds a core vocal nuclei. This unique double-layered neurological engine gives a budgie an unparalleled capacity for auditory learning, allowing them to rapidly decode the microfrequencies of human speech and mirror them with microscopic precision. To physically produce these complex human words, the budgie had to masterfully repurpose its primitive vocal organ, known as a syrinx, which is located deep within their chest at the junction of the trachea and bronchi. Unlike humans who rely on vocal cords and complex lip movements to shape language, a budgie controls the airflow through its syrinx using a hyperdense network of specialized, high-speed muscles that can contract up to thousands of times per second. By independently vibrating the left and right sides of the syrinx, a budgie can produce two entirely different tones simultaneously, allowing them to recreate the intricate vowels, sharp consonants, and subtle inflections of human dialects using nothing more than their tongue, their beak, and an internal organ the size of a single raindrop. This incredible linguistic plasticity is not a random byproduct of captivity, but a direct extension of their wild survival strategy in the Australian outback. Within the chaotic, fast-moving nomadic swarms, individual budgies must use highly personalized vocal signatures, known as contact calls, to identify their mates and family members amid a sea of a million screaming voices. Furthermore, when a nomadic flock merges with a new collective, the arriving birds must rapidly adapt their vocalizations to match the specific regional dialect of the new swarm to avoid social exclusion and aggression. This ancient, hardwired psychological necessity to rapidly learn, mimic, and adopt new auditory structures is the exact mechanism that allows a lonely domestic budgie to view its human owner as its new flock, prompting it to masterfully decode and speak the language of humanity to secure its social position within the home. The final chapter of this epic evolutionary odyssey brings us out of the competitive show benches and linguistic research labs into millions of homes across the globe, revealing the ultimate domestic triumph of the budgerigar. Having survived the burning wastes of the Australian outback, endured the brutal shipping lanes of the Victorian era, and undergone radical genetic transformations at the hands of human breeders, the budgie has cemented its status as humanity's most ubiquitous and intimate avian companion. Today, there are vastly more budgies living in captivity across the major urban centers of Europe, Asia, and the Americas than exist in the wild interior of Australia, marking a complete, unprecedented population expansion that has permanently altered the evolutionary trajectory of the entire species. This massive global distribution is driven by a profound psychological phenomenon, the budgie's unique ability to serve as a deep, highly responsive emotional anchor for the human mind. In an increasingly isolated, digital modern world where humans face epidemic levels of loneliness and psychological fragmentation, this tiny desert survivor has stepped into the role of a vital emotional companion. Because their brains are hardwired for intense, lifelong social bonding and continuous vocal communication, captive budgies form deep empathetic attachments to their human owners. They read micro-expressions on human faces, alter their vocal behavior to match the emotional energy of a room, and provide a constant, grounding source of animate companionship that defies the sterile nature of modern urban environments, proving that their ancient pack psychology can be seamlessly redirected to heal the fractures of human isolation. When you stand before a modern birdcage and look into the bright, intelligent eyes of a pet budgie, you are gazing at an animal that contains a beautiful, unresolved evolutionary tension. Inside that tiny, vibrant body, whether it is clad in the artificial sky blue of domestic genetic selection or the traditional forest green of its wild lineage, beats the heart of an ancient desert warrior. The instinctual drives that govern its behavior are still completely anchored to the red dust of the Australian interior. It still craves the security of the collective swarm. It still scans the environment with a high-speed visual processor designed to outfly predatory falcons. And it still chatters with a vocal intensity that once decided the movements of a million nomadic travelers across the burning horizons of the sun-scorched outback. The journey of the budgerigar is an immortal testament to the power of adaptive resilience, illustrating how a small, defenseless desert nomad could rise from the harshest wilderness on Earth to conquer the domestic spaces of global civilization. They did not achieve this global conquest through physical dominance or predatory violence, but through the sheer brilliance of their social minds, the absolute efficiency of their aerodynamic frames, and an unyielding capacity to forge deep psychological alliances across species boundaries. From the deafening, sun-blocking emerald clouds that roar across the desolate heart of Australia to the quiet, comforting presence of a single talking companion on a modern windowsill, the budgerigar stands as a magnificent monument to survival, an enduring, brightly feathered nomad that successfully crossed the deep frontiers of nature to find an eternal home within the human soul. The epic 5-part chronicle of the Outback Survivor is now complete. If this deep dive into the hidden tactical history, quantum vision systems, and linguistic intelligence of the budgerigar completely transformed how you perceive this magnificent bird, let your thoughts be known by leaving a comment below. To ensure you never miss our next cinematic journey into the astonishing evolutionary marvels of the animal kingdom, make sure to follow this saga. Thank you for witnessing the legend of history's most resilient avian nomad.